You have the floor, sir.
All right. Well, thank you. So yeah, I'll create a brief slideshow to act as a stimulus for discussion about an experience that I had at the beginning of 2016 here in Austin. I live in South Austin, and that's where I was mostly experiencing this. I'm going to go off in a couple of different directions, and I have a bunch of videos that I can play both during the presentation as well as there's some stuff that we might want to watch afterwards maybe. Leave that up to y'all. Yeah. So let's begin. And I'll explain the Smile stealth blimps. All right. So yeah, I'm going to talk about a mysterious experience that I had at the beginning of last year that lasted for about a month, and I'll use it as a springboard to talk about possibly related phenomena. Most people know this phenomena as the Taos hum, or just the worldwide mystery hum. This phenomena has a lot of different names that typically are connected to wherever the geographic location that people are experiencing it is named. And I jokingly refer to it as my stealth blimps experience, which I'll explain at some point. So, now this probably has nothing to do with this. So like I say, this probably has nothing to do with the mystery hum phenomena, but it does have to do with mysterious audio-related effects. Can we save the questions till the end? You've probably heard about the American embassy workers in Cuba who've experienced
that's what I was going to talk about.
Very severe, well, that's what this is. These are screenshots from the news reportage on that. Interestingly, in these particular quotes from the Daily Mail article from a few days ago, a week or so ago, one of the victims describes the high-pitched chirping-like noise, as well as screeching, other noises, grinding, blaring cacophony, that they jolted out of bed and it ceased, but then when they got back in bed, it started again, almost as if it was directed at a location, and that when they were in that location, they experienced this. I recently, in thinking and talking about this recent incident, and of course, apparently this became known late last year and had been going on for some time, and now they're saying there's up to 25 victims, not all of whom are actual embassy workers, but some of their family members, so it's kind of sinister in the sense that it doesn't seem to have been as targeted as they initially thought. But it reminds us of the infamous case of the American embassy workers in, I believe, Moscow in the 70s and 80s that had been apparently bombarded by microwave or some other type of electromagnetic energy for 15 years and have this high incidence of death from leukemia and cancer. WikiLeaks also did a release and cited that case in connection to this one, implying that what actually had caused that cancer may not have been like them directing these beam weapons to harm them, but that it may have just been a byproduct of their surveillance of the embassy workers. This also reminds us of the LRAD system, these other acoustical assault and quote-unquote non-lethal weapons technology that our governments and other military establishments are using increasingly for domestic crowd control as well as in wartime. You've probably seen photos and footage of these LRAD acoustic devices. There's actually two types. There's the LRAD, which is an acoustic device, and there's another one that's actually, I believe, microwave radiation. One creates the sensation of a hot light bulb on your skin, and it's used to disperse crowds, and if abused, could easily cause harmful effects. Yeah. And the LRAD is acoustically based, and it basically just is bombarding people with loud, horrible noises to disperse crowds and that sort of thing.
That's your eardrums.
Along the lines of that Cuba attack and the idea of directed sound in a specific location is a technology often referred to, well, I think the commercial company is called Holosonic Sound, HOLOSONIC, Holosonic Sound. If you look at that picture there up on the top left of those little black triangle, or rather rectangle squares, That was part of an ad campaign for the TV series Paranormal State, and those are the directed energy antennas. They're basically just focused beams of audio so that if somebody walks into that beam, they'll hear whatever's being played. And in the case of this and some other TV shows, they literally were having the people hear things like, have you ever thought about killing somebody? You know, just crazy stuff.
They have those on a building between 4th and 5th Street downtown.
Interesting. I'd like to experience that because I've never actually experienced it. It's a great thing to play with people's heads with, obviously, because if you can basically induce a voice in the head type of experience. Somebody could, believe that they're communicating with their deity or something, or their loved ones. And this is one of their caricature advertisements to promote the sound, because a lot of museums like this technology because they can keep the quiet atmosphere of a museum, but when you step in front of a painting or a sculpture at a certain spot where they've got the audio aimed, instead of in the old way where you put on the unhygienic earphones or whatever, or have a little dome that they're playing an audio related to the exhibit, this is just a focused sound in that one area. Now this is, again, non-lethal, though you could get a little creative with it, obviously, and probably hurt people. But that image has always made me laugh, because I think it's supposed to be like, oh, there are people on the dance floor, and they're dancing, and they're the only ones hearing the sound, but it kind of looks, aside from the musical notes, it looks like they're kind of in distress.
And have long noses.
Yeah.
Or are those caps?
I'm not sure if those are caps or big noses.
Could be horns.
So, I'll really quickly go over what I personally experienced, and then we'll go into the variety of weird mystery sounds. So, the weekend of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, January 16th, 17th of 2016, I don't remember when I first started hearing it, but it was that weekend. It was probably either in the morning or the evening when it was really quiet in the house and I hadn't turned on any, music or TV or anything. And I started hearing what I would describe as a low, bassy, droning tone that vaguely reminded me of like when I've been in large corporate buildings, their HVAC, their heating and air conditioning system, but it wasn't just like the blower, the kind of mid-range, high-pitched blowing noise, but a very low sound. And in trying to describe it to other people, I likened it to that HVAC system, or kind of the droning of if you're in a vehicle on a long trip on the highway, and the sound that the high-speed tires make. But more what it reminded me of is an airplane sound, specifically not a jet engine, but the turboprop, an actual propeller plane engine sound that you might hear, like if you're in the house and you hear an airplane approaching outside. But in those cases, you hear the Doppler effect. You hear it approaching, and then the pitch changes, and you hear it receding as it goes away. Similarly, blimps have those kind of turboprop engines, and so it was the blimp sound that I kind of kept thinking, because I was not hearing that Doppler effect of it coming and leaving. It seemed like it was just a near constant with just kind of a slight alteration in tone occasionally, but not necessarily like some others have described as an idling diesel truck or a construction equipment, though I did consider that as a possibility. As I paid more and more attention to it, I started trying to pin down where it was coming from. I started going from room to room. I would listen in various parts of the house. I live in a 2-story house. Our living room has big vaulted ceilings, but there was the 2 rooms that I heard it the most in were my bedroom and my office. It was ridiculously loud to my perception in the office. And I didn't really hear it quite as much when I went upstairs to the second floor rooms. And I could actually kind of hear it if it was a quiet enough part of the day, like in the morning or the evening. I thought I could hear it a little bit outside the front door and the back door of the house. And so, this became a situation where I was trying to find the source of it, and I kept kind of wondering, is this some kind of internally generated sound that I'm experiencing? Or is there an outside source? And I was kind of hoping that it was an outside source, that I could find it and stop it. It wasn't particularly annoying, but the longer it went on over days, it became a little more disconcerting. And it really was only like during quiet times that I could really hear it. And so like when I would go off to work, I wouldn't hear it at work. And I did think that I might have been hearing it elsewhere, but by that point, I started thinking that perhaps it was sensitizing me to other low bassy sounds that were then becoming similar or reminding me of it. And I think my paranoia was starting to get the best of me. I did a couple of attempts to locate it in the neighborhood, thinking maybe there's some kind of nearby source. Austin, there's a lot of construction all the time, and again, so many of these mystery hum descriptions center around people describing diesel engines or large construction equipment. So I tried riding my bike around the neighborhood, but that really was not effective because there's just the normal environmental sounds would drown out anything I might have been hearing. So I started I'd get in the car and I'd drive like in a grid around my neighborhood to look around to see if there was anything that could have been causing it, but also so I'd drive and I'd stop and I'd turn the car off and I'd close my eyes and sit there, and I could just imagine my neighbors going, why is this guy scoping out our house, or just sitting there with his eyes closed meditating. And it did seem like I could hear it, but less. It didn't seem as loud to me in certain areas. But ultimately, I did feel like I kind of heard it elsewhere. There was at one point where I came to a meeting here with Catherine, and I can't remember the other woman's name, but it was a very small meeting that day, and I was
getting over.
Yeah, and I was still experiencing this, and it was starting to really get to me. And I left the meeting and called one of my coworkers, who is an audio engineer. And I should add, as background, in my day job, I work with audio. I work in a recording studio doing audio book production. And over 10 years ago, when I got into this position, I had developed the reputation of being able to hear things other people couldn't. I've always had really good hearing, despite also always having high frequency tinnitus ringing in the ears since going to rock concerts and listening to loud music as a kid. But despite that, I was still able to hear certain frequencies that nobody else could hear, but then we could hook up an oscilloscope or some kind of audio spectrum analyzer and see, oh, there's the tone, and we could get rid of it. And then I would be, oh, good, it's gone. So I got this reputation in my day job career as having really good ears. We'll come back to that kind of a little later, well, in a second here. So as I was going around, I was looking for anything that I thought might have been a source for this. There are a number of things that could potentially create this kind of a sound. I mentioned here cement tubes or other potential Aeolian harps, and I'll show you some Aeolian harps in just a minute if you're not familiar with what those are. But I also noted that there are near my house some underground natural gas and oil pipelines, and it occurred to me when I was driving around that I was like, well, I don't ever hear about this, but I bet the fluid or the air going through those could create some kind of a resonance and a sound that maybe some people could hear. I kick myself now because I never went to the trouble of trying to record it. Here I am, an audio guy, and I never actually tried to record the sound. And the only people who ever were in my house who I had tried to see if they could hear it while I was hearing it were my wife and a good female friend of hers. And they couldn't hear it. Now, when they were in my office where I was hearing it the loudest, they were like, no, we don't hear any low sound, but we hear a lot of high-pitched sounds. And I was like, really? And it's all the electronics in my, like the computers and monitors and stuff, which I don't really hear. And I know that there are some kind of gross differences in male and female hearing that do tend towards high and low frequency, so I kind of assume that there must be something to that, but it still really galls me that I didn't A, try to record it, and B, didn't get any of my male friends to come and try to hear it. But at some point, so I started searching on YouTube for sounds to try to compare it to, and I'll go into that in just a second. And I also, at some point, started thinking about the idea of low frequency tinnitus, because as I mentioned, I've always had high frequency tinnitus, which is a high pitched ringing in the ears. But I thought, well, then there's probably such a thing as low frequency tinnitus. So sure enough, Googling that, discover in all the tinnitus forums, there's people who say, yeah, I've got high frequency in this ear and low frequency in this ear. And what I also seemed to find was that people who were experiencing low frequency tended to find that a lot more distressing than high frequency for whatever reasons. That it's like with high frequency, you kind of learn to live with it, as I've learned to live with my tinnitus. Most of the time I don't hear it until it's really quiet, and I suddenly notice it, and then you can't stop noticing it. But this lasted for about 26 days. I started keeping a log of what days I was hearing it, what days I didn't, and when it seemed louder. And it seemed to end sometime around February 12th or 13th of 2016. And I gotta say, by the end of it, I was really glad it was over. As interesting a mystery as it was, and as much of a interest I've always had in like the Taos mystery hum and other mystery hum phenomena, which I'll go into in just a minute, it really worried me. It got to the point where I was like, what if this doesn't stop? Will I have to move? And well, what if I move and it doesn't stop? And it hadn't gotten to the point of like pain. But it was very disconcerting. So, and then at some point I did, oddly, after it had stopped, I was at work one day, and we're digitizing all the old analog reel-to-reel audiobook recordings, and we do this at high speed, so that they're being digitized at faster than normal playback, and so it's like chipmunks. And at some point, I happened to just grab the headphones and just to kind of listen to make sure it was still going, and I heard the tone. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. And I got really excited, and I was like, called all my staff over, all male, and I was like, can you hear this? And they're like, yeah, we totally hear that. And I was like, that's the closest thing I've heard to this sound. So I do kind of have a recording of it, but and I think in some ways it may just be like what they call 60 hertz frequency, what's in the electrical system. But I need to do a lot more research on that. So moving right along. So I mentioned trying to find YouTube videos about this. And one of the interesting things when I was trying to find propeller sounds, I discovered that there are like 6-hour YouTube videos of propeller sounds for people who are trying to go to sleep or trying to drown out their tinnitus. I also looked at blimp sounds because of my thinking of that as being similar. But this one here, this propeller sound effect sleep, which I think that's the one that's like, well, it doesn't say link there, but it's really long. That one actually was the closest, and you really won't be able to get the bass effect here, but, and I mean, that sounds like a plane, but, and so there's a little bit of oscillation there, but it's pretty constant. And again, there's no Doppler effect. It's not coming and going. It's almost as if you're in the plane on a long journey.
Have you ever heard the tones?
Exit. Oh, there we go.
Oh, phew, let's look at that.
So
That's impressive.
So I started jokingly referring to these as my stealth blimps. So I would joke with my wife. I'd be like, I can't hear the blimps today. Just playing with the idea that for those of us, I know most of us have probably post 9/11 heard and seen lots of information about the Homeland Security and military-industrial complex. developing all sorts of new advanced blimp technology that's going to be used to monitor everything from the border to battlefield communications, and even in Alex Jones' documentary Martial Law 9/11 Rise of the Police State, he's got the blimps there because he was reporting that Homeland Security and even New York Police Department in the early 2000s were deploying these high altitude surveillance blimps because
you can see those out at the border.
Yeah, and those are the kind that they have at the border that are tethered, and those have been used in wartime for a long time. But so I just started joking around with the idea of there's this invisible stealth blimp that's up there hovering and harassing me with the sound of its engines. Now, for most of us, you probably became aware of this in the mid-90s because of shows like Unsolved Mysteries. The original series aired in 1995, an episode that focused on the Taos hum and the worldwide mystery hum. In fact, I have both versions of this show that we could watch later if you're interested. The first one is the one hosted by Robert Stack. And then in 2009, they repackaged it, and they had a different host, and they used the same footage but kind of wrapped it with different beginnings and endings with the new host. I think his name's Marin, or I forget anyway.
But it's on the topic?
Yeah, it's specifically on people experiencing that, and they have a representation of the sound, so we might want to watch that later. It's a little long. But that was most people's introduction to this idea. Local newspapers were covering this sort of stuff. In doing research for this presentation just a few days ago, again, a week or so ago, somebody did one of these top 10 lists. In this case, it's 27 things you probably didn't know about the TV series Unsolved Mysteries. And here they're talking about the different locations that have experienced it, the Bristol hum, the Bondi hum. And they described this as one of their most popular episodes. It got a lot of reaction from people. They also described that it was tough to shoot because it was all sound-based, but to me that's kind of silly because it plays just like every other episode. They actually have actual experiencers and reenactments, and they do some interesting stuff in that episode. So I was also curious, how popular of a search term was Taos hum, and according to Google, this is a chart of its popularity, I guess, in articles and search terms from all the way back to 2004, which is as far back as their trending software goes, to the present. And strangely, I don't know what caused that. There was a spike in September of 2009 of interest in that term, Taos hum. So there's a number, there's so many places around the world that have experienced this. It does seem to mostly start in the 80s and 90s. Most of these incidents seem to center around the early 90s, 1991, 92. But then there's places like in Indiana, the Kokomo hum, British Columbia, and Windsor, and some of the Canadian ones are going to be we'll come back to because there's some interesting developments there into what the possible source might be. And here's some references to hum in Oregon. High-pitched noise keeps Oregon town awake at night. And here's the big difference, too. In my case, I seem to have only been the only person to hear it. As far as, I don't know if my neighbors were hearing it. I didn't want to go knocking on their door and saying, hey, we don't ever talk, but by the way, have you been hearing anything strange lately? But when I looked for anything South Austin mystery hum, I did find that there were some reports to the TexasUFOsightings.com. Hey Texas, do you hear that hum? And as I did more research, I found that just like pretty much anywhere, any urban environment seems to have reports of this, and I will get to the worldwide nature of this in just a second. So how far back does it go? Researcher and radio talk show host Micah Hanks did a really good article, The Rumbling Below, Strange Sounds of Engine Noise from Underground. And again, this is where, there's a lot of different subcategories of this mystery hum phenomena, but he covers in this article the kinds of stuff that I was partly already aware of, but gives some even older citations, like from William Corliss's archival science files about some campers in 1970 hearing a strange sound that they perceived as being like an engine-like noise that seemed to be coming from underground. And that's something I'd come across again in UFO books and references. Here again, in the same article, is something that I was foremost in my mind is some of the weird stuff that happened in Yakima Indian Reservation in Washington State. They have these fire watch towers where, interestingly enough, a lot of these people were seeing balls of light, UFOs, also reported, Bigfoot sightings, and they also recorded weird sounds that seemed to be coming from underground. And this is there's always a variety of sonic and audio effects that are associated with weird encounters. I've heard UFO cases where witnesses, after they've had the UFO sighting, will experience almost paranormal-like phenomena where they'll hear like the sound of footsteps on gravel, like as if somebody's walking up their gravel driveway, but when they look, there's nobody there. But again, this underground turbine, and as this person says, unsynchronized propellers on a multi-engine aircraft was how this lookout person described it. This person also said that their dog seemed to display anxiety when they were hearing this sound. Again, 1970, 1978, some of the earliest references. Now, as many of you know, I used to publish a zine called ELF, Infested Spaces, ELF being extremely low frequency, the radio energy that's been associated with claims of mind control research and military communications. And in fact, this UFO researcher, Ron Holtz, back in the early 90s, I posted this article in my summer 1998 issue of my magazine, in my Mind Control Corner section of the magazine, his article, ELF and the Hum, and where he talks about, since 1991 and on, hundreds of people in Taos and even for further environs around the world were describing this strange humming noise. So here again is that divergence between like one person hearing it and other people not being able to hear it, to whole communities hearing it. And that, obviously that's a big difference there, so maybe we're talking about different sources for this phenomenon. But he also started speculating, as does the Unsolved Mysteries episode, that the hum is actually somehow connected to the military's communications program that utilizes ELF, extremely low frequency radiation. And so this is a telecommunication system a secret communication system that was designed to communicate with their subs around the world. And they literally had, and still do, I think, have antennas that are basically cables that string for 25, 50, 75 miles. So the frequency of that radio wave is massive. It's huge and can't be shielded against. And might explain why people around the world would be suddenly hearing something that they hadn't been hearing before. There's some research that seems to suggest that might be the source, and there's other research that seems to contradict that. But that idea has been around since the 1990s that ELF might be the source of this. So I mentioned earlier Aeolian Harps. There's a number of different ways of creating these. On the one on the right, you see these tubes. And so when I mentioned I was looking for like cement tubes like you see on construction sites when they put in these big underground sewage lines or whatever, that's kind of what I was looking at. And there were some near my house, but I didn't hear that sound right when I saw them. They're often used as like art and sound music installations. As just the wind blows, you get this kind of flute-like effect that creates sound. Or in the case of the one on the left, it's just wires, and that's why they call it a harp, because you can actually sometimes long high-tension power lines, with the wind going over them just right, can start generating a sound. Now, to give you a sense of this, there's a big famous building. Well, that's not what I heard.
Is that the wind?
That's the wind.
Going going through that building.
Through that building, through that part at the top, apparently.
That would be annoying.
Yes, the community hates that. And
Where is
I believe
that? China
there.
somewhere?
No, this is in England. It's
Really?
here, I have it here.
Those people living on like there?
Yeah, I wonder what it sounds like inside the building. Can they get enough people to rent it? Or it's apparently it's the largest.
You think they take that down?
I believe the architect has actually publicly apologized. It's the Beetham. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Beetham Tower Howell, tallest residential block in Europe. Also houses the Hilton Manchester. And there's an article about it online. Mysterious, strange sounds baffle residents of Manchester. I don't think they're baffled because they pretty much have identified it as that. And it would seem like they could just disconnect that. I don't know if the shape of the building causes that too, but it's, I believe, attributed to the structure on the top. Now that's obviously very different, and that actually makes me think more about these other mystery sounds. Over the last several years, you've probably heard a lot of people talking about
Trumpets.
Trumpets in the sky and other types of sky sound phenomena. There's another video I won't play, but that's a guy that was featured in some European news where he videotaped himself. He's like, oh, there it is again, and he keeps putting the camera out the window. And it's not as obnoxious as that other sound. It's more mysterious, and I think it's legitimate, but I don't have any idea what the source is. Now, there's another one called the Windsor hum over across the border with our friends in Canada, and they actually commissioned an investigation of the Windsor hum, and they came to a conclusion, and they held a press conference.
The second phase of the study, which used acoustic monitoring, concluded that the Windsor hum does exist and has characteristics suggesting the source is from Zug Island in River Rouge, Michigan. Pinpointing the source of the disturbance is a complicated task, and a myriad of factors can affect the results of the research. This study, however, is a concrete step in the right direction. Government of Canada has exhausted its own options to pinpoint the precise source of the hum, and the results of the study demonstrate that in order to determine the source of the Windsor hum precisely, further work must now take place on the U.S. side of the river.
We're quite satisfied with the findings that there is a Windsor hum, and we're very happy that there is scientific and official recognition by the Government of Canada and backed up by solid scientific evidence. And so I thank the Government of Canada for undertaking that. But there still is a very big challenge, and there's a very serious challenge ahead, is that we need to know the exact source. There's a hypothesis, a scientific hypothesis, that it's coming from the U.S. steel blast furnace. Many people have already concluded that just based on the evidence of standing in front of it or being in that vicinity. So it's a shame that it's not backed up by scientific evidence, and that is the actual core of this. We still don't know what the potential health effects are, and that's something that's very disturbing. So, while I applaud the Government of Canada and the efforts of my friend Jeff Watson, who's probably been a champion of this file as well, there's still a lot more work to be done.
So yeah, Zug Island is the alleged source that this scientific inquiry allegedly determined was the source. And so I don't know what a steel blast furnace could do, but I know that these are massive, industrial operations. And again, a lot of the speculation over the years has been, oh, maybe it's some kind of, huge HVAC system, that, like these kinds where, you literally have turbofans that you could drive a truck, through,
right.
That are feeding the airflow and heating and cooling for a massive underground complex or a above ground complex. So that's kind of some of the most, to my mind, that's the closest thing to government acceptance of it, and it's it says a report released by the federal government, the Canadian federal government. They're basically like, it's those Americans, it's their
problem.
Now it's up to them now to go further with it. So, but there continues to be obviously a lot of interest in the subject. It's a very popular topic, and in recent years, it's kind of gone in a dark direction. Obviously, people have claimed to suffer at the hands of this mysterious phenomena. A particularly good article that I recommend by a writer named Jared Keller for Mike.com, Mysterious Sound is Driving People Insane and Nobody Knows What's Causing It, goes into a lot of the different speculation and research and efforts to identify the source, and he cites a lot of the same sources that I've been mentioning. But it also goes in a darker direction, and that is the possibility that some people might be driven so far over the edge that they commit acts of violence. And for those of you remembering the Aaron Alexis Navy Yard shooting of a couple of years ago, it was reported, and a lot of the media were very confused by this, but anybody who'd been following this knew what this meant. Allegedly, he had scratched into the metal surface on the shotgun, my ELF weapon, my ELF weapon, and better off this way. Now, this text that I have here is from that same article from Mike.com by Jared Keller, where he mentions a researcher who I've tried to reach out to, but we haven't connected yet, but his name's Steve Kohlhase, or Kohlhase, and he's been researching a similar hum in Connecticut, and he believes that it's connected to natural gas pipelines. Kind of like what I think I must have read this before I thought, when I came across the pipelines in my neighborhood and started thinking about that as a possible source, but maybe I had that thought independently, I'm not sure. But he was so compelled that he actually wrote to the Newtown, Connecticut investigators, because he believes that it was that kind of phenomena that could have led Adam Lanza to commit that act. And interestingly enough, as it says here, while law enforcement officials field a flood of calls from conspiracy theorists and pranksters following any major incident, investigators deemed the information Kohlhase provided, quote, appropriate for inclusion in the 7,000 images, audio files, videos, and documents they released to the public. So there's another interesting case of a governmental organization including reference to theories about the source of a mystery hum, but in a much more exotic and frightening possible implication. Now, so I had this experience in beginning of February 2016. I didn't really talk about it much publicly. I mentioned it when I was experiencing it here at the meeting with Catherine and to a few friends here and there. And then in the Anomaly Archives newsletter for June 15, 2016, I mentioned it in the article for the newsletter that you see there, where I just kind of offhandedly said, oh, and I had my own experience with this earlier this year. And linked to some of these articles, like the one by Jared Keller that is linking this to the idea of mind control, or people who believe that they're being harassed possibly by these kinds of technology.
Have you ever heard of any with the high-pitched tone?
Yeah, I there's in the many different literature of self-professed mind control victims. There's been a number of.
I'll ask like my roommate or whoever's there with me, do you hear that? And they're like, well, I hear it. So it's just like, oh.
Yeah, I generally. Mystery hum phenomena tend to be described as low frequency, but I believe that there's been some sufferers who've described it as being higher frequency. So in researching the subject, I discovered that there's this researcher and experiencer, Glenn Mcpherson. He's a former school teacher. He's not technically a scientist, but he's approaching this from a scientific perspective, and he created the World Hum Map and Database Project, where there are now, I think, over 13,000, maybe it's less than that, but thousands and thousands of cases now that you can submit your report. And so I did that, and I submitted my report. But here is another mainstream news article, news coverage. Al Jazeera.
Not only a very beautiful environment here, but it's also a very quiet environment.
At his home in the rainforest along Canada's Pacific coast, Glenn Mcpherson researches something that science says shouldn't exist. but it does for him. He hears it every night.
When I first moved here, on my first night after the house quieted down, I was actually taken aback at how loud the hum was.
The worldwide hum is usually described as a low-pitched rumble, like a car or truck engine idling nearby, with electronics pulsing. This is a simulation.
We'll be finding out soon enough whether or not the world hum is as prevalent in Asia as it is in the English-speaking world.
Now, after 4 years, his worldwide hum and database project has found nearly 13,000 people on 5 continents who've emailed to say they're hearing something. The number's too large, Mcpherson says, to dismiss as hysteria, delusion, or belief in the supernatural.
Given that people arrive at this independently, and now looking at the hum map and looking at the distribution of the geographic distribution and the distribution in age and gender, what these people are reporting is something that is certainly real for them.
This paper from the University of Oklahoma 12 years ago links the sound to a U.S. military program that uses VLF, very low frequency radio, and aircraft to communicate with nuclear submarines underwater. It's the first of 4 explanations that Glenn is pursuing.
Second, the hum is the grand accumulation of human activity at low frequency sound and infrasound. Third, that the hum is a terrestrial geological phenomenon. And fourth, the hum might well be an internally generated phenomenon by the body. Let's just throw this off.
Using a specially built steel box that's supposed to block radio waves, Glenn wants to eliminate all outside sources for the sound. Yet so far the hum is still there, even inside the box. That means new approaches and trying different technology, trying to, as he puts it, give himself and thousands of others around the world the quiet life they deserve. Daniel Lack, Al Jazeera, on Canada's Pacific Coast.
So was he crawling in that steel box?
Yeah,
Faraday cage.
Basically, it's a Faraday cage, but yeah, it really looks like a flotation tank, isolation tank.
So is there a physical vibration?
Some people do describe a physical vibration associated with it. In the Unsolved Mysteries episode, some of the experiencers describe the vibration. Also, that early report from 1978 from the fire worker in Yakima, she described a sense of vibration for coming through the floor. So, like I said, I did submit my experience to the database. It was not successful the first time. I had to resubmit it, and it did seem to finally take. I don't have a screenshot of this, but there are plenty of reports in Austin and South Austin, even where I live. But they don't all. There doesn't seem to be a grouping in like the same period of time as my experience. And as I said, I didn't really talk about this very publicly, but then come April of last year, my friend and co-host Mack White and I decided to talk about it on our radio show, PsiOp-Radio. And the thing is, I'd never mentioned it to him, and it's just one of those things. It was really weird. Like, he was really shocked when I didn't mention it, because he was like, you know what? I had an experience of this or something similar in October of 2016, and he lives in Fort Worth. He used to live here in Austin, but he's been moving back to his childhood roots in Fort Worth, Texas. And so on the show we discuss, and I've put up a YouTube video of the audio of our discussion of this, where I go over much of what I've said here today and more. And he describes his experience, and his was very different, though. It was different times a day. It seemed to come in bursts, and it seemed to be in very finite periods of time, and his wife could hear it. But there were aspects to what I described and what other experiencers have described that he said fit the same experience as his. And of course, he, as anyone, started doing lots of research and found a lot of the references to, could this be military? Could this be HARP related? He also found that there were other people experiencing it around the same period of time in, the Fort Worth area, and that it was, a lot of the people were speculating that it was associated with a particular nearby military base, and some even said that they heard it coming from the base. I have audio of that, or I have audio of him describing that, but it's kind of long, and I want to wrap this up. So, as I mentioned, it is still a very popular subject, and interestingly enough, this journalist from Washington, D.C. started experiencing it herself, started investigating it, and wrote a really well done, balanced article about it in the Washington City paper. Highly recommend it. Her name's Emily Dufton. And interestingly, the picture there with her child, she first started hearing it when she was breastfeeding late at night. And the thing here seems to be she was up late at night when things were quieter, and that's when she started hearing it. Was there a physiological component? Not sure, but it eventually stopped. I don't know how long it went on for her, I forget, but I highly recommend her article as well. Again, there's constantly news articles about this. I've got lots of links about this on the Anomaly Archives webpage for the mystery hum phenomena. This one is in a town called Cromer from March of this year. So just to conclude, or start concluding, these are some of the many explanations that are advanced for various explanations for the sound. Yes, fish farting and fish mating. That in the last year or two there was somebody, and it was a mainstream news article, and they did not take it seriously, but that was apparently somebody's legitimate suggestion. Of course, HAARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, is often identified as a possible suspect. Mundane idea, internal body noises, as I mentioned, low frequency tinnitus, and even ocean waves. And just within the last couple of weeks, Glenn Mcpherson issued this statement and linked to a research paper that he feels is leaning him back towards the direction that a lot of these are just internally generated sounds, that he thinks is not, that seems to go away from the idea of an external source, but that there could be other factors, as he says, medications, environmental exposure, and infrasound that could be triggers possibly for this. Catherine?
The placement of those dots has me think that that is the area of the world that we as sort of scholars of submarine history is referred to as the Western world. That's what those dots are. Mm-hmm. That's what we learn referred to as the Western world.
Yeah. And any Western science, any Western scientific investigation is necessarily going to be more a reflection of just that, Western scientific, Western civilization.
It's mapped out in dots.
I would bet you that most of the people in Africa do not have internet access and can't contribute to the database. So, this is not necessarily a reflection of where the hum is, but just who has the ability to know about the data collection going on.
But that still means it's still there.
Right, and that's why he says in that other interview about, he's hoping that we're going to start getting some feedback from some Asian countries. And I believe because at the time, he'd gotten some press in some Asian news outlets and was hoping that there would be some resulting.
You have the floor.
So, from that same period of time in 1998, there was this article that I came across that was copyright 1996, The Influencing Machine by Mike Coyle, about one of the earliest known cases of somebody exhibiting what they call medical paranoia. This was in the 1800s, and this individual, whose name I forget, but it's on the next slide, he described a quote-unquote influencing machine that he believed was being operated by what he described as the heirloom gang. And these are 3 different books that have been written on this subject. The guy's name was James Tilly Matthews. I believe he was a tea merchant. And he described this elaborate device that he called an heirloom that was somehow sending magnetic waves across town from a London office to harass and manipulate him. So it's one of the earliest cases of somebody describing trying a conspiracy of mind control technology. I have not read any of these books. I've only read a few articles here and there about this, but it's a fascinating case, and it seems to be. It reminds me of, say, the Aaron Alexis and other people who feel that they've been targeted and harassed by these kinds of technologies that are difficult to pin down and prove. And it reminds me of my joking about being harassed by my stealth blimps. And as far as the UFO angle, a blog article by a writer I really respect named Jeff Wells from a website called Rigorous Intuition was an article he called Spirit of the Beehive, in which he chronicled a number of the different cases of the humming sound, the bee-like humming sound, which is very different than the mystery hum because it's more high-pitched than low-pitched, but that seems to be associated with so many UFO close encounters, even the biblical tales of encountering various entities. And it may be relevant, it may be something completely different, but it just I threw it in because it's UFOs.
Well, it could be a cloaked UFO.
Yeah, it's hovering. I tell you, it's a stealth blimp. It was harassing me with low frequency
Stealth blimp.
rays. Anyway, thank you so much.
Tell me what this is, the unusual times. Is that just